It was a heck of an experience. The only thing I could compare that crowd to was if you were in an arena or a stadium when a home team wins a championship. I mean, that's what it felt like. It was unbelievable.
Right. So this isn't like LeBron James where people are like, some people hate him, some people like him. This is 90,000 people all cheering for the same guy, right?
As a matter of fact, not just the fans. One of the fellow writers that I had been spending some time with there was standing on the rail as Pharoah crossed the line, and she turned around to the guy behind her and just started crying on his shoulder. And I went, all right, that's a little bit much for me, but it does show you what kind of emotion this really did bring out.
Barry Abrams with us, host of the In the Gate podcast at ESPN.com. Barry, last year, Victor Espinoza, he rode California Chrome, and there was a lot of criticism of the way he rode that horse. What did he learn from that, from last year's race?
Well, I thought, first of all, some of the criticism was a little unfounded because there were two parts to that day, to that ride on California Chrome. Number one, you got to be careful when you push the button on the horse, because the horse only can give you as much as he has for about 3/8 of a mile. And normally on a typical racetrack, that would be from like the beginning of the final turn to the finish line. At Belmont Park, because it's so big, it's really more about halfway through the turn, because Belmont's is such a big racetrack. Victor rode that perfectly. He didn't push the button on that horse until they were almost at the top of the stretch. But the other part for which he was criticized was that as California Chrome was going down the back stretch about halfway through the race, he was in the middle of the pack. He wasn't at the front. He wasn't all the way at the back. That is his running style. But the Belmont Stakes is not typically won by a horse coming from behind. You would think that it would be, because it's such a long race, that there's plenty of time to make up ground. But what happens is the pace of the race is normally pretty slow because it's so long, and the front runners need to save their energy. So they do, and typically they've got plenty for the stretch, and the front runners usually win. And so the criticism of Victor Espinoza last year was you should have had the horse closer up. But that's not his running style. He likes to have a target to shoot at. This year, there was no such issue because American Pharoah is typically a front runner. You saw it in the Derby and especially in the Preakness. We just went right to the lead. And I have a feeling that Victor Espinoza probably had in the back of his mind that criticism from last year and just said, I have the best horse, and I'm riding him like the best horse, and we're going to the lead, and if you can catch us, more power to you. And when the first half-mile time went up in 48.83, just about 49, that was my magic number. I said, if he gets away with a 49-second half, this race is over, and it was.
Barry Abrams was with us, host of the In the Gate podcast at ESPN.com, covering the Triple Crown, 37 years. So, Barry, what has changed for the person who watched that and wondered, why 37 years? I've been watching racing a couple of times. What has changed over the years that has made this feat such a difficult task?
Mainly the breeding. I mean, if you go to any racetrack, to Parks or to any other nearby racetrack, most of the races are a mile or under. They're basically sprints. Yet, it's the three Triple Crown races that are all longer distance, what's usually referred to as middle distance, that are the most dear. But think about a human sprinter versus a human marathoner. Clearly, they look different. And the same is true with horses. You're going to get these horses nowadays that are bred with big shoulders and short, choppy muscles, and they bull their way through that dirt as fast as they can. But yet, the Triple Crown races are the ones we hold the dearest. So there's just been something of a disconnect. If you go over to Europe, where a lot of the races are longer, some of them are 2 miles or more, and they're on turf primarily, on grass, you're going to find horses that are very long and sleek and just glide right over the ground. You don't see that here. So there's a bit of a disconnect there between what the breeders want and what the general public wants.
Barry, American Pharoah wins this race. Now, you got to win 3 pretty emotional races just to get to this spot and put yourself in position. You've already gone through a lot. So how emotionally spent is that team after 3 wins in such a short amount of time?
Well, you mentioned that Victor Espinosa learned from the criticism. So did his agent, because this year Victor Espinosa had much less media availability before the Belmont, because his agent said that the year before Espinosa had been a little too much of a celebrity, and this year they wanted a win. So he definitely held him back. Bob Baffert, this is a guy who had been through a heart attack in 2012. He had 3 chances at the Triple Crown before that, which, was almost unheard of anyway. But clearly when you've had a brush with mortality, you learn to put things into different kind of perspective, plus the fact that right after that heart attack, he lost both of his parents within a year of each other. So clearly he knew how to pace himself and, really understood what this was about. And so, he spent, but I'm sure he savored every minute of this, because he said when the horse crossed the line, he did something he doesn't normally do. He paid attention to the crowd. He never listens to the crowd, but he really listened to the crowd, because he really wanted to drink this in, and he'll have time to lead a normal life next week.
ESPN.com's Barry Abrams, host of the In the Gate podcast. You can listen to his conversation with Bob Baffert and, of course, the owners and all the team leading up to this race. I thought the podcast leading up was really interesting to hear the owners of this horse talk about just life in general, in terms of, how he named some of his horses, how he has different trainers, why they pick it. It was pretty interesting stuff, so go check that out. But as for American Pharoah, does he give this sport life? Is it just, like a one-time event, or do you think now they can build off this, or is it one of those things where how do you build off of this? What do you do next? Because we don't know when we'll ever see him again.
Well, it's not even – it depends on how you look at it. If you're talking about him, you could very well see him on the Jersey Shore in the Haskell at the end of July running for $1 million. And then possibly the Travers at Saratoga at the end of August, or the Breeders' Cup Classic the first Saturday of November. Now, if you're talking about building momentum for the sport off of this, the problem is this is a deregulated sport. There's no NFL commissioner of horse racing. I'd be happy to take on that role if you elect me, but there is no commissioner. And so there's no marketing machine like there is for the NFL or the NBA. They're just going to sell some T-shirts and a couple of other pieces of memorabilia. So that's the first problem. The other thing is I don't think American Pharoah's victory is going to make people go out to parks this week or next week or whatever, because American Pharoah won the Triple Crown. So I don't think you're going to see a bump there. And come on, if this horse runs the Breeders' Cup Classic the first Saturday of November, are you not watching Penn State football because American Pharoah's running the Breeders' Cup Classic? I don't think so. But where you could see a positive development for the sport is that there may very well have been people sitting on their couches watching this saying, I've always wanted to get involved in sports somehow. I don't have the money to buy the Dallas Cowboys or the Los Angeles Lakers, but, that California Chrome horse last year that almost won the Triple Crown and won the Kentucky Derby, he only cost $10,000. I could do that. And so you may see people get involved in this sport. It's tough to measure. It's tough to quantify. But I could see something like that happening, especially in a recovering economy. So that would be a positive impact for the sport if it happens that way.
It's interesting, Barry, because we have Seattle Slew affirmed, and, of course, 37 years have separated a lot of this. In American Pharoah, you talked about the difference way they breed. Will people remember this horse? Is this a horse that has an all-timer, a memorable guy because of the horse, or is it just because of the feet?
Oh, no. Clearly, even Secretariat is measured because of the feet, not necessarily just because of the horse. Because remember, Secretariat lost races before the Triple Crown. He lost races after the Triple Crown, which shows you how big a performance those really were, especially the Belmont. So it's all about not just the horse, but the moment. And this horse saved his best for the best moments, notwithstanding the fact that this horse was hurt for about 4 or 5 months last fall and winter, didn't run the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, still won 2-year-old championship honors. And for him to come back this spring and not miss a beat and not put a foot wrong and keep his weight on, which is not good for you or me, but it's really good for a horse when he can keep his weight on through a spring campaign. All of that so brilliantly. I mean, he is an all-time horse. I don't know if don't even start comparing him to Secretariat. That's not even fair. Is he in the realm of Affirmed and Aladar, 1978? As Bugs Bunny once said, it could be.
I think I heard, it may have been with Joe Tessitore on the ESPN television broadcast, that Secretariat would have beaten a Pharoah, American Pharoah, by, I can't remember the lengths, but it was considerable, the amount of lengths that if he ran in that race the way that he ran in his race, that it would have been not even close. I think that...
Well, let's put it this way, all right? The previous record for the Belmont Stakes was when you break a record in any sport, you're breaking it by fractional amounts. You're breaking it by 2 points or 0.2 of a second or something like that. This horse broke the record for a mile and a half on dirt by over 2 full seconds. It's just staggering. Dirt is so hard to run through that typically the fastest quarter mile of a race is the first one, and horses end up decelerating as the race goes on. It doesn't look it, but that's what's happening. Secretariat ran every single quarter of the Belmont Stakes faster than the one before it. He accelerated all the way through that race. It is absolutely logic-defying. It is mind-blowing. You cannot overstate how incredible that was.
Well put here. Barry Abrams, ESPN.com, host of the In the Gate podcast at ESPN.com, and you can check that out for more on History Made. You heard it right here Saturday afternoon on 97.3 ESPN. American Pharoah wins the Triple Crown for the first time in 37 years. And I guess now, is it good? Is it a good thing, or is the myth of this feat better for the build-up? Do you think that next year people care as much now that it's happened?
You're a very smart man. I said all along when people asked me, is it better to have a Triple Crown winner? I said, no, it's better to have Triple Crown attempts because this record had become something like Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak and Jack Nicklaus's 18 golf majors and Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game. Not records that were unreachable, like, I don't know, Cy Young's 511 wins or Richard Petty's 200 wins. I'm talking about records that in theory could be reached, but just hadn't been, and they had that romance to them. So now I agree that if somebody goes for the Triple Crown next year, maybe it'll have the same amount of interest. I'm not so sure.
Great ratings for this weekend. Not as good as even last year's, though. Kind of weird. I think the overnight ratings were...
That surprised me a lot.
Yeah, me too.
I saw that it pulled a 12-3 on NBC, and I'm thinking, what is the other 77% of America doing?
Maybe they were listening to us on the radio that day. I don't know.
That's possible.
Very
what are you doing watching anything else?
I don't know.
Anything else?
I don't know. It was a little surprising that more people watched the race last year than watched the attempt for history this year. Check out more.
Maybe because of the owners, because the owners were very everymen-like people, and they did have a bit of a charisma to them.
He's at B. Abrams Voice on Twitter for more on when you can see American Pharoah. Barry, it was a pleasure to catch up with you, man. Great stuff.
Thanks, Mike. Anytime.